Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. We're returning to our Plants vs. Zombies Cross Vampire Survivors mashup to put in some work. Because last time we introduced the level up menu back into the second iteration of our mashup project. An unfortunate side effect of this new addition was the time spent converting the old plant code to work with the new, and it's something we're continuing to do with today's session, but on an even greater level of difficulty that almost drove me insane. However, before we get to that madness, remember to leave a like if you enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future game dev videos. And with that promo out of the way, let's take a peek into my nightmare. So today is all about continuing work on leveling up, and as such we need descriptions that explain each plant's level up rewards, which has been lovingly stored as array entries in our plant reference structs. The initial default description replaces the original description variable that we were using before. And yes, most of this has yet to be implemented and currently only contains dummy text. But of course, this means corresponding text is now displayed based on the level value stored in our plant roster arrays, which was important because it works in tandem with our brand new upgrade functions. The main upgrade function covers both player and plant upgrades. The player upgrades are pretty straightforward, but plant upgrades required a class check. If passive, the upgrade is applied directly to the target entry. However, active plants required us to run through the list of plants on the play field and upgrade them all manually. More on why this is a thing later. The upgrade application function simply takes the arguments provided and updates the target struct data. How it does so is based on the information stored in our plant reference structs. This allows us to not only change things on the fly without much issue, but also evolve plants without having to do any removals or additions. And evolutions are as simple as updating the struct data with reference data for the evolved plant. But before we see that in action, let's talk about the level up function. Now this function takes the plant type and the level needed to reference and applies the corresponding upgrade to said plant. For now, there are only entries for the sunflower, walnut, pea shooter, cherry bomb, and kernel pot/cob cannon. Most are simply variations on their vampire survivors counterparts, but the kernel pot in particular evolves as their final level up reward. And so here's all that upgrade goodness we've just covered in action using the kernel pot as an example. The kernel pot has replaced the plantern as our Santa water equivalent, and as we slowly level up the plant, the amount of projectiles, the size of their AoEs, and their damage all increase until they get to level 8, where the kernel pot can then evolve into the cob cannon, to which the plant is updated and begins using the cob cannon stats instead. Right now the whole presentation and behavior is temporary, but you get the gist of the whole level up system in action. And while we're here, our player stats are also now displayed when the level up menu is opened. There are little icons that represent each stat, which are currently damage, armor, max health, health regen, cooldown, attack range, projectile speed, base projectile amount, move speed, pickup range, luck, and experience modifier. And luckily we can see these change as we invest in leveling up our latest re-addition to the plant roster, the walnut. The walnut is a passive that will increase the player's armor value. Currently that's all it does, though it may do more later. Let's just put a pin in that one for the time being. Now before we dive deeper, because yes there is deeper, let's talk about this menu. This menu now automatically omits plants that have reached their max level. This was done by rewriting the random picks and basically applying checks based on context. It was a headache and ended up taking a lot longer than expected to implement, but it now works in tandem with the rest of our systems automatically. And speaking of headaches, this project was indeed almost derailed completely. And let me explain. So again, this is version 2 of our attempt at this mashup. The old plant attack/behavior code was carried over to save time, because on its own it really couldn't and didn't conflict with anything else. However, the addition of the level up menu brought to light a huge oversight, because our active plants are all treated as individual entities. Now each pea shooter placed in the world does pull data from the same reference guide, but after it's spawned, that's it. It's set. Now again, when we upgrade active plants, each entry has to be upgraded individually. It's not ideal, but unfortunately that was just the tip of the iceberg, because plants of the same type that spawn in after are then spawned in using base stats. not upgraded stats. Now, the passive plants don't have this issue because they are run on a different, more efficient system. And so I was left with two options: rewrite the entire active plant system to closer resemble the passive system, or find a way to make it work with the current code. Now, the latter option was decided, and thus a less than ideal yet very much needed solution was concocted. When a new plant is added to the play area, a check is made for an existing plant of the same type. If it finds a match, their stats are copied from that plant and applied to itself. And yes, I'm very much aware of how inefficient this code is and hope to improve it in the future. Still, this one took a while to write, mostly because I really didn't want to accept the reality of such an oversight. And much like the previous session, this was a ton of work for very little visual payoff. But believe me, the amount of drama going on behind the scenes felt like quite the battle. This was one of the few times I had to literally walk away from a project and take a few days to think about the next step before returning. And it got so bad that a hiatus was actually considered at some point. Mostly due to the frustration at yet, another major oversight. But as always, that's part of the process, and it's easy to tunnel vision sometimes and, forget to look at the larger picture, and luckily things were salvageable this time around. So hopefully we'll be able to avoid such dangers moving forward. But drama aside, I'd love to know what you guys thought of these updates, especially with using plants such as the walnut in this fashion. As much as I would like to add the ability for walls to spawn with the walnut, it might complicate the enemy's pathing, which will likely tank the performance. So physical obstructions are off the table unless I can somehow create a better, extremely lightweight collision system. Anyway, leave any and all thoughts in the comments. And if you want to get early access to weekly videos or play a few games that have been featured on the channel, subscribe to my Patreon. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.